Welcome back to Pharmaceutical Soccer. We are not as cheery as we were just a week ago, as Nashville put in its worst performance in maybe a year over the weekend, losing 3-0 to the Seattle Sounders in a game that could have been worse. Clay Trainum, once again, joined by Valer Shabilla as we break down Nashville SC going into, at this point, 3 losses in the last 4 games. So a little bit of a rough spell. But before we get started talking about that, we have a very important question that we ask every week, which is one, where's Steven? And then two, how was your weekend, Valer?
Question one. Steven is in Loudon, of course, back to his home ground. Not really sure. I think the players all have to pitch in terms of like handyman work. So considering he has no skills of such, I think he's just there for moral support. He's kind of capoing the players of Loudon United. That's my take. As far as my weekend goes, yeah, no, just chill. I got Easter lunch, I guess, and hang out with some friends yesterday, and just enjoyed soccer-filled weekend. Got to watch a little bit of Premier League. It was an enjoyable one for me as an Arsenal fan. Watched a good bit of MLS. I guess this week in MLS, other than the 2 late games, I felt like it was kind of weak, honestly. So not as entertaining in terms of all the games, not just Nashville SC game. Yeah, it was a good weekend, man. How about you?
It was definitely an interesting soccer weekend. Obviously, Nashville winning was not fun, and Everton not winning was not fun. But I will tell you this: did you happen to see? The scarf is above my head here. Did you happen to see what happened for Union Berlin on Saturday?
No.
It was one of the wildest games. So they were playing Stuttgart, right? They were at home to Stuttgart. In the first half, there were 8 goals.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a 4-4 draw. There were 0 goals in the second half.
what happened?
So like Berlin scored in the 5th minute, the 19th minute, and then Stuttgart scored in the 23rd and the 49th, or the 29th. Then Berlin scored in the 38th, and Stuttgart scored in the 43rd and the 46th, and then Berlin scored in the 51st because they had a lot of added time. And then it went to halftime.
Unbelievable that the second half just didn't have goals.
Yeah, if I was a gambling person though, after 8 goals in the first half, I 100% would have put like $5 on a scoreless second half because that's such a soccer thing. And then
how are you in Berlin doing in the
they're
Bundesliga?
they're secure. They're going to be there again next year. They're kind of mid table.
Okay.
I mean, it's a really impressive thing that they've managed to stay up. I mean, Germany is so up and down, and they've played in Champions League and they've been in the relegation spots. They haven't been relegated since they got up to the first division for the first time. So pretty exciting. But then yesterday, I took a quick little day trip to Evansville to see some family, including friend of the show, Adam Taylor, who used to cover DC United on a podcast very much like this one, and we've both have been on it. So talked a little bit of MLS while we were up there, and now getting ready to close down the semester. And so that's about as much as that we can say without talking about the Nashville game. I feel like.
Well, I will say, speaking of Union Berlin and sort of the magical tale of lower league teams kind of making it up, and obviously fan owned teams or fan operated teams and stuff like that. This past weekend, it wasn't the weekend. Sorry, during the week, I did watch a good amount of U.S. Open Cup, and we'll come back to it in the third segment and talk about it more, but. I just want to let folks know that that's still going on. It's a nice little, tournament that just has all sorts of stuff. If you miss the live games, go watch the highlights. If you don't feel like watching the highlights, go read a little bit about it. Read about the tournament. It's one of those things that, something American soccer longs for often is the history. And coming from the outside to America, that's something I didn't even know existed, and then there's so many people who are in America still don't know that it exists. So the U.S. Open Cup is very important, and I just want to give a little promo for it as a competition here in the first before we rub back and talk about how Nashville SC is going to participate in it this year.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is when someone is first getting into soccer, like seriously, is saying, "Hey, go look at that Open Cup Wikipedia page because you're going to feel a lot more like U.S. deserves, to have a voice in the soccer conversation because the Open Cup is so expansive and there's so much interesting stuff, and there's a lot of U.S. history in there. I mean, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole at all, but immigrants played a huge role in soccer coming to our shores and everyone coming to our shores, honestly. But also, like, a lot of these teams were ethnically based teams that built up this competition over the years, well into the 80s, and some of these teams are still around, which is pretty wild to think about teams that have clubs that have been playing club soccer in the U.S. for maybe not 100 years, but certainly there are some that are getting pretty close to that. And so it's a real fun wormhole to go down the U.S. Open Cup. But before we do that, well, let's talk about Nashville's game against the four-time U.S. Open Cup champions, the Seattle Sounders. Now, I don't really know where to start on this one. I mean, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit here in a moment, but like they just got punched in the face and didn't have anything.
Yeah, I think you saw what a established project, if you would, with Brian Schmetzer that's been going on for years and years. Who that has had different faces, to be honest. Let's be honest. It hasn't been all the same players, but the core has largely been the same. And I think you saw what an established sort of Brian Schmetzer Seattle team that has won the CONCACAF Champions League, the only MLS team to have done that in the modern era. A team that has won MLS Cup, that team that has won Supporter Shield in the past, and you know, four times Open Cup, like Clay said. So I think it was one of those things where a team like that playing at home with the quality they have just ended up being a step above a team that had just started this project with B.J Callaghan. And I don't want to say naive from B.J Callaghan or naive from Nashville SC, but it's more so reality, right? Like this is where Nashville SC is, I think. And I know Seattle hasn't had the best of seasons, so I don't want to give that as an excuse, but maybe it's a little bit of an explanation of what happens when a team that is a well-oiled machine that's running and running and running, and a team that's just kind of starting to put those building blocks face each other, especially when Seattle's the one hosting.
I I kind of do think naive is the right word. I do think that there were some lessons learned, and there's a lot of things that honestly we've talked about on the show that kind of spelled out in that game. And so we're going to get into what that actually means here in just a few minutes. But just generally speaking, I do feel like on this show, what we try to do is if the team is flying high, we try to point out, hey, there's some things to look out for. And if the team goes out and has a bad performance, a lot of times we come on this show and say, "Hey, not you're never as bad as you are at your worst, and you're never as good as you are at your best." So what I would stress to people is yes, the team has lost 3 out of the last 4. They've had good performances in 3 out of the last 4, I would say, and or at worst 2 of the last 4 they've had good performances, but I would argue 3. And I think that that's important to remember is that your results don't always represent who you are in the way that you're playing. That being said, that's the worst that Nashville has played in a half in a very, very long time.
Yeah, and look, I mean, we all sat here last week and said Nashville has somewhat exceeded our expectations this season already. And if you are looking at this Seattle match and you're upset, I totally get it. You're a fan of Nashville SC. You should be upset when your team loses 3-0. But at the same time, I think there's a measure of maybe level headedness that is go. And to be fair, I haven't seen these a lot of fans overreact about this or anything like that. I'm not saying this exists. I'm just saying, like, being upset about a loss is not a bad thing. You should be upset about a loss at the same time, understanding where Nashville SC is with B.J. Callaghan at the moment is putting things into perspective. I mean, the table whatever table. Still too early for the table, but Nashville is firmly in a playoff spot at the moment. Something they huffed and puffed last season, couldn't get to. So, there are these sort of positives to pull from, and one game in a 34 game season is not going to be the defining sort of success or failure.
And if Nashville ends up being a good team, they certainly won't be the only good team that went to Seattle and got blitzed.
Yes.
So with that being said, we're gonna take a quick break. We're gonna come back with the second segment. And we're gonna kind of break down what we mean when we're saying about these things in a little bit more detail. You're listening to Pharmaceutical Soccer. And welcome back to Pharmaceutical Soccer. Clay Train. I'm once again joined by Valer Shabilla. Make sure you check us out at Pharma Soccer on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Check us out at pharmasoccer.com and 615 Soccer as well. 615soccer.com as well. Support us, and then sometimes you'll get a shout out from Max Bretos on a broadcast. Hopefully in a game that Nashville is winning. Uh, but unfortunately, that was not the case, as Nashville did lose 3-0 to Seattle. Now, we talked a little bit about this point right before the break, and that was Nashville having a bit of naivete going into that game. And now I will say that I think there's a little bit of hubris that going into that game, and that is, B.J. Callaghan goes out there, says they're not going to change the way they play. They're going to play the same way regardless of the opponent. And that is a noble thing for a coach to say. A lot of managers say that, and then what they do doesn't necessarily match what they say. And I think if you look at this game in a vacuum and you say Walker Zimmerman is out, you're playing away to Seattle, which is one of the toughest away games that any team in the East can play in any season, really, the last 10, 15 years. You maybe you're not setting up necessarily to just like absorb and take pressure and finish with 35% possession and get, a counter. And you're not looking for a smash and grab, but maybe you're looking to break up a game a little bit more. Maybe instead of going with, a Brugman who you're going to rely on offensively, to start things off in the back, you go with both Tag Seth and Yazbek, try and break things up, make it a little bit more of a scrappy game. And that is where I think that a lot of the criticism could maybe fall is in the actual lineup and in the way that Nashville tried to play, because they came out gangbusters. They had some good chances early on, but Seattle kind of figured it out. Schmetzer's a good coach. It's a good team. They've had a lot of different players, Seattle has, over the years, and they figured it out. Like Jordan Morris scored, or Jordan Morris didn't score, but he basically didn't play, and he's one of the he came on as a sub, but he's one of the only guys that's been there the whole time. They've been able to cycle guys in and out and find ways to play and figure games out and unlock teams. And I thought it was only a matter of time with the way that Nashville was playing that they would figure something out. The first goal felt a little bit fluky, with the finish and the way it came off, but the other two goals, I mean, they were established with the way that the game was playing out, that Nashville was going to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean that second goal, just to go off of that point, it's just not a not a goal that Seattle forced you to give them. Let's just say that it's a goal that Ahmed Qasim takes the ball, is very, very, just lackadaisical with it. Just doesn't even look around. Gets the ball stolen from him, and then I think it's not Pedro de la Vega who scored the goal, but um, I can't remember who it was who crossed the ball to De La Vega, but they just kind of breezed through Jack Mayer, like it's nothing. Like there was no challenge on anything, and I kind of get it from Jack Mayer's perspective because you don't want to give a penalty there. Um, but man, you got to make it a little bit more difficult for the attacker. And then yeah, I mean the finishes. Look, for first goal and second goal, the finishes from Seattle. I don't want to take anything away from them. Those are good finishes, but just a little bit of better organization at the back or better defending from those two individuals, and you're looking at not conceding. And I think that's been kind of one of the frustrating points for Nashville SC this season is that the opponents aren't necessarily outplaying them in the matter of that they're outplaying Nashville SC when Nashville SC loses in ways other than just pure soccer, right? And I think that's where it becomes a little bit annoying. As like those three goals, Nashville SC just kind of gifted at least two of them if you don't want to, And I don't want to. Again, Seattle did really well to convert those. They are a good team that can do that, but a more secure Nashville SC would mean maybe they get out of that half losing 1-0, maybe they get out of that half 0-0 if you just a little bit more tighten up at the back. And maybe the difference is Walker Zimmerman. I get that, but at the same time, we've seen this defense without Walker Zimmerman be able to perform. So to me, it's just one of those things where maybe the travel, the turf, all that maybe played a little bit part of it. The fans played a little bit part of it. And when you're going gung ho away from home, like Nashville SC were the first 10 minutes, um, you just kind of risk some things going at the back. And that's exactly what happened. Seattle took every single advantage of that risk. And maybe that's kind of the nativity that Clay was talking about, where it's just kind of maybe instead of going gung ho at every single moment, you kind of pick and choose certain moments where you choose that to press Seattle in their own half instead of committing too many men forward and all of a sudden finding yourself in a pickle.
Well, and that's the way that we've traditionally seen Nashville play on the road. Like obviously, it's a different manager. So I'm not like trying to relitigate having a new manager, but a lot of times when people talk about teams, they talk about things being in their DNA. What Nashville did for years going on the road, come out strong. They don't get anything in the first 10 minutes, they're pretty much going to slack off and going to absorb pressure and maybe try and get something on a counter attack. That's not the way that BJ wants to play. And that's not necessarily, he's not necessarily wrong for not wanting to play that way. But when you are without, one of the best defenders in the history of the entire league in Walker Zimmerman, and when you do have some questions in midfield, I think that's fair to say. I mean, we know that Yazbek can be a good player. We know that Brugman has struggled at times, but Eddie Tagseth has been the best midfielder on this team by some measure. And you're playing without him, and that's a guy who does break up stuff, who does press, who does force opportunities, to force chances that Nashville can be opportunistic on, because he does, turn things over. And so you're just taking a lot of wild cards, and not you're not really sure how it's going to play out. And that was really the thing that stuck out to me about it. I don't really think, I mean, the Qasim giveaway is a bad giveaway in a bad spot. I do not think that it's probably designed for him to be getting the ball in that area either, to be honest. But I also think that he has to be better. But if that's where we're trying to start out our attacks and trying to start, things are already not going well,
Yeah,
because that is, and I do want, and I don't want to just single out him, because I don't think Nahar had a very good game. Like Andy Nahar was, one of the best players the first month of the season. I think he really struggled a lot in that game. And I was honestly kind of surprised that he stayed out. They moved him up the field a little bit, obviously, with the way that they lined up. But it was one of his worst games as a Nashville player, at least the first half. It was one of his worst performances in the Nashville jersey.
yeah, and again, like I don't think we need to single out every single player, but that entire back line was just not on their day. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I just mean that in somebody trying to analyze the game and what they saw. On your point, Clay, Andy Nahar on the first goal, I understand what he's doing. Like I usually, when you see that still image of a defender keeping an attacker on, you're probably doubting why they're doing that. But then when you kind of take it further back and see where the crosser of the ball was and how he was trying to get into the penalty box, it makes sense where Nahar's positioning is. And I think a fluky shot from Jesus Ferreira that kind of gets in the way of Musovski, who converts it, a back heel sort of thing. Like I don't think you can be prepared. Like I do think you can maybe be a little bit more reactionary, react in a faster way from the center backs. But I don't blame Nahar much for his positioning on keeping Musovski on the first one.
Oh, I
Uh,
wasn't talking. I was talking just generally, not just even the
yeah, yeah,
goals.
no, no, no.
Yeah.
But just let me. So on the third one, however, I do think Nahar makes a little bit of a mistake there. And again, this is a group thing because just like how chaotic it gets on the other, and I'm using the word chaotic, but let's just say, attacking it gets on the other end, where B.J. Callaghan on multiple occasions have told us that when Nashville SC has the ball and someone looks like is about to cross it, or someone looks like is about to create a chance, you run into that penalty box. It doesn't matter if you're the left back, right back, center back, whoever you are. We need people in that area. You go in there. And that's his mythology. That's his principle of play. He wants people in dangerous areas regardless of position. But that concept also applies at the back, right? So when Andy Nahar sees a player that's needs support on the other side, not on his side, not on the right side, and Nahar runs to that player, leaving a huge gap for Paul Rothrock to run into, and finds himself in abundance of space. And now all of a sudden you look at, again, if you look at just the still image of three Nashville SC players on one Seattle player, and on the other end just a free Paul Rothrock to take a shot. Obviously, that doesn't look good, but that comes with the same mentality of everybody defends, everybody attacks, that B.J Callaghan keeps pushing towards this team. And there are going to be days where this stuff happens, especially against teams who can hurt you, because that's the nature of this style of play, and that's the nature of these principles of play. Now, are there things they can do better? Absolutely. Is every team who plays in this style conceding 3 goals in 15 minutes? No, like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying this is the nature of a learning team with a coach that's kind of playing it a way that is more risky than a lot of coaches play in Major League Soccer.
Well, and I think that that's ultimately what this boils down to. Now, I we'll talk about the second half in just in a second, but just to expound upon that point just a little bit, uh, some people asked why I was a little bit more skeptical about the project with BJ Callaghan before the season, because I was like a real wait and see. I have been kind of won over by what he's been doing, and so but I do want to return to that point was that he is a first year head coach. Like if you take last year and say you're washing that out because it wasn't his team and he was trying to do his best, I don't think that that's totally you can totally wash out that. But I want to say if you want to take that aside, that's fine. I understand. Then you're going to have halves like that where you set up wrong. You're going to have the wrong approach in a game every once in a while. That is just part of the learning process. You know, that is the way it operates when you go get a guy who doesn't have. Uh, now, I think that risk is worth that reward. And I think the way that Nashville has played has shown that this can work and he is working towards it. It is just when you do that, you are signing up for the occasional game like this. Now, if it's happening in year 3 and year 4 of BJ Callaghan, that's where you pull back and say, okay, what do we think is going on here? But in the first year, first group of player, like first real group of players that are his guys, other than the DPs, of course, like you're gonna say, all right, well, he got his cards wrong that game. Fortunately, there's playoffs in this league, and there are 33 other games.
Yeah, and I think if you poll Nashville SC fans at the moment, they'll tell you that they prefer this than anything else. I mean, in terms of the risk, is it worth it? I think a lot of them would say it is worth it. I do want to go ahead and go into the second half, where for the first time since the season started, we saw Nashville SC play in a different formation, or a different shape, I should say. Nashville SC just have been playing in the 4-2-2-2 sort of shape. In the second half, they put in an extra center back, pushed Andy Nahar up. It was a back three, but in possession, it looked like a back four with sort of a 4-2-3-1 type of shape. But it's a back three out of possession because Nahar tucks in and all that. Um, Claire, what did you think about it? I'm curious. It's a special moment, so like I don't want to judge it. That's where I'm at. But where were you on it?
So I talked to for those of you that are on the Discord, you know, I had some thoughts on this. I'm hesitant to get too into the weeds on it because I do think that you're looking because Nashville did play better in the second half. Nashville also played better in the second half against an experienced home team without some of their better players up 3-0 in a game. So natural game state was going to tell you that Nashville was going to look a little bit better. I do think that if you're looking for a way to get back into a game, you know, I just talked about a game in the first segment that was 4-4. I don't think in MLS you can say a game is absolutely over at 3-0. Just the way the league is, I don't think you can. And so when I was sitting there watching it, I was kind of annoyed a little bit because, you know, the substitute, like the giveaway aside for Costume, which is unexplainable, he's really the only guy other than Hani that I thought was going to be able to create anything on the basis of what's played out this season. And I know that I was interested to see what Schaffelberg would do, and he didn't end up doing a whole lot. But I was interested to see what Schaffelberg would do because going into the half, I was like, they're going to have a lot more possession because they're down 3-0. How is Schaffelberg going to play in possession? Because that's not typically been his strength. And so I was more interested in seeing kind of these guys in these roles because I wasn't totally sure that it was going to work out, and they had a better half, but I don't want to focus too much on the sort of shape because BJ says shape doesn't matter. And so they went to a back five, back four in possession. I think that we saw some little nuances, little differences, but for the most part, they played the way that I expect Nashville to play. And so I think that that's kind of important. Um, and so you always want to see, after you have a bad half, a coach make an adjustment to try and see if he can find something else, find another gear, find a way to get back into the game. And they didn't really do that. And honestly, Seattle could have scored another couple of goals in the second half. And how would we feel, if it ended up 5-0, if Jordan Morris puts away one or two of those chances. So uh, I don't want to overanalyze it, but I was a little bit surprised because I did think that they would push and maybe try and you know, try and see if they can manufacture a chance of some sort. And I don't really, they were more threatening in the first half than they were in the second half, and they lost in the first half 3-0, at least
Yeah, I
from my
think
vantage point.
no, and I think at every point, maybe for like maybe a couple minutes of the second half, barring those couple minutes, Seattle were closer to the fourth goal than Nashville were to the first. And I think I tweeted that out because, it just from a game, what it looked like was a Seattle team that just said, we're going to shut down shop. We're going to take our 3 goals, our 3 points at home. That Seattle desperately need a good home performance that hasn't been the greatest season. And then you look at the substitution that Seattle bring in. They bring in Albert Rusnak, Alex Roldan, and Jordan Morris off the bench. Those 3 players start in every single MLS team. You know what I mean? They're coming back from injury. So then you're looking at a team that's already good, and you add those 3 players to it. So it's kind of like at the end of the day, there was a lot of quality there, and there was just Seattle just kind of mentally we're like in no way we're giving anything away. We're so happy with this result at this moment. I do want to say back to the formations don't matter thing. Totally agree. I mean, B.J. Callaghan probably would tell you this himself, but it's really more so the principles of play and the way that the team sets up than formation. Uh, I do think that going to a back three did stop the bleeding a little bit. Now, again, game state, all that, but it did stop the bleeding in terms of giving up as many chances. But it didn't really help in attack. And I one thing I want to talk about is Andy Nahar. I just don't think that right wing back spot or that right wing spot at all fits him. I think one of the most dangerous things about Andy Nahar is that he can invert inside first and foremost. He can also build up play from the back. When you put him higher up the pitch, he's not the type of player that's going to be as effective there as he is at the back. The way he passes the ball, the way he progresses the ball, dribbling or passing from the back, the way he absorbs pressure at the back is what makes him who he is. And the fact that he can do that from the right back position really gives him a priority over someone else who can play in that position. To where when you put him out wide, closer to the touchline, higher up the pitch, that ability, getting the ball to him and having him run at defenders is not as it didn't bear as much fruit for Nashville. Let's just say that.
There's a reason that ultimately a guy who came up as a winger ended up being a right back. Like if he could play higher up, like that would work. Like that would suit him. There's a reason he ended up at right back. And so if you get him closer to being a winger, you're kind of making him more average than at a right back where he's above it. You know what I mean? It's almost like they're both older and their best years are both probably behind them, but it's an Ashley Young situation. Yeah, like it's a similar.
Ashley Young more so than Andy Nahar, but
Yeah,
older.
well, no, but I mean, I'm kind of just joking, but like
Yeah.
it's the same sort of concept. And
And
so
I do want to say, like, we're not here, two-footing Andy Nahar and or
yeah,
saying anything. I mean, especially with the second half. I mean, that wasn't his decision to go into that position.
he
But these
he's been
are
one of the top 3 players on the team the whole season.
yes, yes. If I was to vote right now, he'd still be in the top three for the season so far. Clay, did you think that the Walker Zimmerman not being there would like? Did you think that's as big of a deal as people are making it seem like? I guess.
Yes, but not for the reason people are making it seem like. So I think that the biggest problem with Walker Zimmerman not being there is not on the field, but in their heads. I think that because we've seen how this team performed with Walker Zimmerman versus without him, I think that guys, I don't want to say defeatist because that's not the word I'm looking for, but there's a security blanket aspect to it, I think. And I think that, like, because Jack Mayer's been a good defender, he's been a good defender in games that Walker Zimmerman hasn't played it. But he looks like a different player right now without Walker Zimmerman out there. And I don't know if that has everything to do with Walker Zimmerman or everything to do with just comfort of someone being there that can do the job. And I don't know if I'm really describing it the right way,
No,
but I don't, because it's not like Walker Zimmerman's like he's a good defender, like he's one of the best defenders, in MLS history, but it's not like he's this amazing all world like defensive presence. He goes forward, he gives up goals. These are things that he does. He is better at it than most, obviously, but like I do feel like there's some sort of comfort that comes with that. And that when he's not out there, there's something that's lost that maybe is more of a mental block than a physical block.
how many times have we come into this show and said Walker Zimmerman makes players around him better?
Yeah.
That's what that is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if we're saying that when he's on the pitch, the players around him play better. When he's not on the pitch, the players don't play as well. I
Yeah.
think that's been proven every time this player has not played for Nashville SC, and that doesn't mean that Nashville SC can't perform without him. That doesn't mean Nashville SC is bad defensively without him. It just means that he makes them elite, I think, in defense, to where without him they're good to average, really. And I think that is something of a Walker's Zimmerman effect. I do want to say on that point as well, just like it affects mentally Nashville SC players, I think there's a mental thing for the opposition as well. If you are a Paul Rothrock or a Musovsky, and you're looking on the team sheet and you see Walker Zimmerman, that you're going to think about that a little bit differently than if you see Palacios. And that's not to say Palacios is not experienced or anything, but you've probably never heard of Palacios. We hadn't heard of Palacios until a couple of months ago. Let's be honest. So when you look at that and you see somebody who's won Defender of the Year, what, 3 times? Like I think there's gonna be something in your head saying, "Oh, I'm going against this guy who captained the U.S. men's national team, who's played in a World Cup, versus a guy I've never heard of." And I do think that does have an effect mentally more so than on the pitch, kind of like you were saying, Clay.
Well, and it's not just defensively either. I mean, like this is a team that is um it doesn't have a lot of aerial threats. I mean, they kept describing Sam Surge as an aerial threat, and we watch him and know he can score with his head, and he can,
Yeah,
have good finishes with his head, but that's not the way I would describe him, more often than not. And if you're a team that is desperate for goals, which Nashville SC is right now, they haven't been finishing their chances. They didn't finish their chances the first 15, 20 minutes, that whole game's different if Nashville is as opportunistic as Seattle is. But like, you're not worried about Nashville SC set pieces. Like the last header was Dan Lovitz. Well, he's probably not going to score on a header the rest of the year. Like that. You're not worried about them if Walker Zimmerman's not out there because Walker Zimmerman is, if not the best in the entire league in the air, he's in the top 2 or 3.
yeah.
Like he's one of the best aerial threats in the entire league, and he's not out there. And Nashville's corners are dreadful anyway. But like that you're just taking another outlet to get back on to get the goal back in the net to get a little bit of confidence to get some of these things going. And so it's not just the defensive side, it's also, and not only that, everyone else, like to go to the whole making everything better, if Walker Zimmerman is out there on set pieces, that opens things up for everyone else on set pieces because you have to focus on Walker. Because if you don't focus on Walker, it'll be in the back of the net. So there's a lot that you miss with him out there, with him not out there. But I do think that is worrying. Of course, you don't want to depend on one player in a league, but it's just the way the league is. Honestly, when you build teams with restricted rosters and things like that, you can be overly dependent on one player because you're only allowed to spend so much money. So, but answering the Walker question I mean, that dates back to the day that he signed with Nashville SC. Really, I mean, how do they play without Walker? It's always the big question.
And I do think there's a little bit of onus on the attack. I don't want to. I don't want this episode to sound just like a defensive collapse or anything like that. I think there's B.J. Callaghan comes in every press conference and says, "We all attack, we all defend." He said that. I I, I kid you not. Like every press conference, he said that. It's a very important thing that this team does. So from a midfield perspective, I thought Brugman struggled in the first half. Getting Gas back in there, I think helped a little bit. He can cover a little bit more ground. Obviously, the game was 3-0, game state, all that. Things are different. But then also in attack, I thought Sam Surridge
You mean
missed a
getting
couple of.
Tag Seth in there, not Yazbek?
Sorry. Yes, thank you. Tax in there. Yes, for next to Yazbek.
Yeah.
That's what I meant to say. But yeah, I mean, obviously, when you have somebody like Taxath, he's going to cover more ground than Brugman, right? We kind of know his game and what he does. But in attack, I thought Sam Surridge had a somewhat disappointing night. No clear chances. I don't want to make it sound like he missed a sitter or anything like that, but there were multiple half chances that he just kind of wasn't able to convert on, and that's been the story for Sam Surridge all season. I'm not worried about it in terms of whether or not he's worth the DP money. To me, what he does for the team is actually as important as goal scoring. And maybe that sounds crazy for a striker, but it's a real thing. What he does for the team in terms of counter pressing and in terms of opening up space for the players around him is very, very important. And he's very fluid. He goes to the left, he goes to the right, and kind of creates so much off the ball as well. So that is important. However, as a striker, you are going to eventually be judged on your goal scoring. We've said that multiple times, and I do think that his goal scoring is disappointing to him probably. I was seeing something from Jeff NSC Stats, shout out 615 Soccer, all that. But I think he said he had an XG of 5 or over 5 this season, and he scored 2 actual goals. That's not where you want your DP striker to be.
And I think that that's more than likely a sign that he's just underperforming his actual play. And so I think that we've seen that. Unfortunately, we've seen that a lot the last few years. So I think that is like something to keep an eye on. I do think it is like it's one of those where it's like the underlying numbers say that Nashville should be doing better and they aren't, which is frustrating. But then the other side of that is the underlying numbers say Nashville SC should be doing better. And so eventually they will be. And that is the part that I'm going to lean on because I'm usually a glass half full kind of person. I do think it's an interesting thing to watch here because Nashville doesn't have a true out and out center forward other than Teal Bunbury. And even he used to be a winger. So like I do think it's interesting to watch because Sam doesn't play as an out and out center forward. He goes out to the left a lot, but he goes to either side, and you'll see Kasim slide into spaces that you'd expect a center forward as well as going out wide, and you'll see Hani do the same. So there's a lot of interchange going on over the course of the game, which can be a good thing. But I'm really interested to see how it plays out. I think a lot of people are over. I mean, I think a lot of people are overly negative about Serge and Hani to start the season. I don't think on the basis of what they're doing on the field, it's totally justified yet. Now, if it continues like this and they're just never going to be good finishers again, obviously that's something to worry about. But like, I think Nashville's played some pretty tough games here the last few weeks, and they've gotten their chances, and they should have put more away, but they've gotten their chances in games against teams where a lot of people will struggle to put away. And so I think I said this a few weeks ago. I've certainly said it, in the Discord. I think that if Nashville's ceiling this year is to be a flat track bully, to be the team that goes out and beats the Montreals of the world and maybe takes their lumps against the top 5 or 6 teams in the league. That's a perfectly fine, acceptable thing to be into your first year of a rebuild. Like that is a totally acceptable thing. And if that's what they are, that's cool. I think they're better than that. And so I think we'll see more than that. But like I think just kind of keep thinking about it in those terms. Like let's see another month of games and what they're doing in more games that they should be winning, as opposed to these games that are always going to be tough on paper. And then because we're kind of running along here, so just real quick, a last thing to talk about. We got another NSC debut, the youngest player in NSC history, right there at the end of the game. Speaking of someone to replace Walker, maybe that's your solution right there.
Well, yeah, welcome to the league, Chris Applewhite. Go ahead and chase one of the best attackers this league has ever seen, who just came off the bench. It was, I appreciate B.J. Callaghan giving him an opportunity. I think at that point it was kind of the game is somewhat gone. Why don't what you've gotten this kid, taking him out all the way to Seattle. Give him a debut. Let him see what he can do out there. I really don't feel like rating what he did on the pitch because 13 minutes when you're down like 3-0, it's whatever, man. I'm happy for him to get his debut. He's been long waiting for this. He's one of the most talked about youth products this team. He is the most talked youth product this team has ever produced. Actually, I will say that. He's one of those guys that people have long said he has a bright future. For the last 2 years or so, he's been on everybody's radar. He's made the MLS Next All Pro. What is it called? The
Yeah,
game that they All
yeah,
Star, All Star. Yes. Yeah, there you go. English language and stuff. He's just one of those guys that's been on the radar for a while. He finally gets his debut. He's chasing not Roy Kent. I had to correct myself. The other Kent, the actual real player Kent, and he has to chase Jordan Morris around. So yeah, really tough environment to be put on. But look, good for him. I think we're going to see a lot more of him this season. I think there's going to be. He's been training with the first team quite a bit, and I think for the Open Cup game, for example, or just in league play, especially with Walker being out, I think you'll see a little bit more of Chris Applewhite going forward. Maybe more than we expected, even.
yeah. I'm pretty excited about that. Obviously, the more young players getting up to the team, the better. Um, I'm very excited. We're going to talk about it here in a few minutes, but I'm very excited about that Open Cup match because I think there's a chance to see several debuts. And so, especially considering that while the Red Wolves have been doing well in Open Cup, they're not a good team. So we'll see a little bit more, but we'll talk about that here in the next segment. You're listening to Pharmaceutical Soccer. We'll be back with more in just a moment. And welcome back to your third and final segment of Pharmaceutical Soccer. Make sure you check us out at Pharma Soccer on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Clay Trainham, once again, joined by Valeria Shabilla. Steven Robinson is still out and away. He says that he's with Loudon. We have heard some rumors that he is starting a Chattanooga FC podcast. And
I
I'm a little bit worried.
Look, I don't want to talk about your sources and what you have heard, but I have pretty good sources that says that North Texas FC are conducting interviews with him as we speak. Um
Nice.
so I don't know where he's going to land, but we know for a fact it's not going to be Nashville SC just because he doesn't even like this team. So
Yeah, yeah. It's honestly it's a bit embarrassing at this point. This sort of like charade he's putting on. He doesn't even live in Nashville.
I know.
So anyway, moving forward, we always say that we're gonna, look at the mailbag. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that, and then sometimes we forget about it from week to week. So to rehash, if you give us a rating on Apple Podcasts and it's a 5-star rating, we will read that review on here. And if you talk about how much Steven loves Chattanooga, we will make sure he's the one to read it on here next week. Also, if you can make sure that you say how much he hates Chelsea and all these things, like either way, we will make him read it. So if you do a 5-star and only 5-star, if you do less than 5-star, we're not reading anything. 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, we will read it on the show. And also make sure you give us a review. Make sure you or give us a rating. Make sure you give us a rating on Spotify. And then today I learned that there are comments on Spotify. So we're going to answer a couple of those as well as some mailbag questions here real quick before we get into talking about the Open Cup and the upcoming game for Nashville SC. Now, first off, we got a comment from John, who's a longtime listener of the show, first time commenter. He says, "quote I love how Valaire inherited Ben's hates Nashville moniker." Blair, do you have anything to say to that?
Um, the people of Nashville hate actual journalism. I don't know. I have no other words.
Okay,
No,
fair
I'm
enough.
just kidding. It's really not that serious, y'all. I just say my opinion, and sometimes that opinion triggers folks. Whether sometimes it's positive and it triggers folks. Sometimes I'm like, hey, Nashville, this player did well and they're up in arms. Sometimes I say this player didn't do well and they're up in arms. So that's life. I don't know what to say.
All I'm saying is that if you think Valaire hates Nashville, there are plenty of gifts to prove otherwise. Now, well, I got a question from our old friend Max, from a former radio partner of Pharma Soccer, who wanted to know a lot more about the Club World Cup, in addition to some other things about Gianni Infantino. But I said, and I think that this is fair, one, Nashville's not playing in the Club World Cup, even though we're hosting it, as I'm sure most of you who are listening to this show know. When we get closer to that, the Club World Cup begins in mid-June. We will give a whole breakdown on what's going on and what you need to know about the Club World Cup going into it. And considering that some decisions about the Club World Cup are still being made because it's a bit of a mess, it's a little bit early to do any sort of preview on that front. But do not worry, we will have you covered when the Club World Cup comes to Nashville later this summer. And then this is a question from a couple weeks ago. I think we kind of talked about it a little bit last week, but I think it's worth expounding upon a little bit. And this is from Ryan on the Discord, which you can be a part of if you become a Capo member of 615 Soccer. He said, "How quickly is the perception of NSC just plays Gary Ball changing, if at all, outside of our happy little echo chamber here?"
Yeah, first of all, you can get access to the Discord with a supporter subscription as well.
My
However,
apologies.
you will not have access to the mailbag. So what you
Yeah,
said was technically correct. Capo member does give you access to the mailbag. Sign up regardless. Yeah, it's changing. I think some things within the Gary Ball idea are just stuck with Nashville SC at this point, and they don't seem to be able to get rid of them. Not the whole idea of sit back and defend, but I've heard so many commentators talk about Sam Surridge being a true number 9 and how tall he is, and I just don't know what they are watching because he doesn't play like a true out and out number 9. If you watch any games of Nashville SC, it actually frustrates me how much this is a narrative about Sam Surridge. The only reason he has that narrative is because he signed for Gary Smith. That's let's see. There's no other evidence. If you watch this guy play, he is not he's not Peter Crouch out there. He's not Andy Carroll out there. He's playing out wide more than in the middle often. So it just frustrated me. There's also this whole thing about Nashville being like really, really good defensively, which again, they're like okay defensively. They're not bad. But after last season, I think it's very clear that some things needed to change, and I don't think they play defense the same way. So these things are kind of lasting effects, I think, of an era that lasted a pretty long time in terms of head coaching in MLS. So I just think it's going to take a while for these things to change. But I think the perception of Gary Ball as a concept or defensive play as a concept as a whole, I think that is pretty much gone from the league.
yeah, and I would say that the concept was never truly fair to begin with, because on the basis of numbers, like Gary Smith's teams weren't like the worst scoring teams of all time. He had several high scoring teams. It's just the way that they played. And so I think that the perception was always a little bit weird because it always gave way from national media folks that they weren't watching, which we've talked about on this show, especially around a particular former U.S. national team player a few years ago. Now, I will say this: the clearest sign that things are changing on that front is that during this little lull where Nashville hasn't really gotten results, one of the biggest cheerleaders in national media of the way Nashville plays is Matt Doyle from MLS Soccer, who seems pretty sold on the project being still very much a project, but with a potential payoff down the line. And so I think that it's getting out there. And I think one of the reasons it's also getting out there, and this is where we're going to pat ourselves on the back a little bit, is that we've put a lot of effort into building more information around Nashville SC right here, 615 Soccer. And I alluded to it earlier, but like folks read, what we put out there. Folks listen to what we put out there that are covering this team, and Ben writes the piece about Gaston Brugman, and a few days later, it's being talked about as what Gaston brings to the team, and so that is our role. That is the role of all local independent soccer media in every city, and so it's very important if you're going to change perceptions that teams get covered professionally.
And I think there is an onus on those national voices that I think the Ryan is referring to here. There's an onus of them to go out there and seek the information and watch for themselves. And I hate to say this, but unfortunately, not everybody does that. There are certain commentators that if they have Nashville on their schedule, they'll DM me or Twitter or give me a call and ask me certain questions. There are others that clearly don't do their homework. And you can tell by their commentary. And I think that's just always going to exist. I mean, I've seen it even for Arsenal in Premier League games. I'm sure Clay has seen it with Everton, and these are like way more popular teams, way more popular leagues. So there's always going to be an element of that. You're not going to get everybody to kind of agree and see the mission from the start, but that's kind of the reality of sports. Clay, I'm going to ask you this one because I think you want to answer it. So
Yeah,
this comes from Thomas, also on the Discord, and I think you did have a little bit of an answer on Discord, but hey, go for it again here. Thomas says MLS being an attendance dependent league, how does it compare to other sports domestically or leagues of other countries? That's something that came up in our show last year. Last year probably came up last year too, but last week specifically from you, Clay.
yeah. So the reason I put it on here because I did answer it on the Discord, but if one person's asking this, other people are asking it, and so what I mean when I say that is that we've talked at length about MLS's TV deal and about how much better it is than every TV deal they've ever had compared to every other TV deal in the United States. It's not very good. Compared to every MLS deal that previously existed, it's great. So these teams, the finances of MLS are a little bit convoluted because they're hard to figure out. But what we know is that match day revenue is more key to everyone paying bills than anything else because they don't bring in nearly as much money on television. And so that means where else is the money coming from? Sponsorships, it's coming from um, other sort of commercial deals, but a significantly larger chunk of it is coming from game day, whether that's parking, concessions, tickets, gear. I'm sure they
Merchandise,
sell way
yeah.
more merch at a game than they would do otherwise. It's coming from premium seating. It's coming from all of these avenues that are tied directly into match day purchases. And that accounts for a significantly larger chunk of the pie for MLS clubs than it does for basically any other league in the United States and a lot of leagues outside of the United States. But if you get outside of the United States, you'll see match day revenue is a huge indicator. So it is a soccer thing because there's so many soccer teams. But to give you a sense, like an example, like a cogent example of that, as people know, I'm a Dodgers fan. The Dodgers have always had the biggest stadium in Major League Baseball. They had lots. They play in a major market. They've been a big spending team, but the reason that they spend like crazy the last several years is because they have a multi-billion-dollar TV contract. So even with all the match day revenue that they were getting, which was more than basically everyone in Major League Baseball, they weren't spending like crazy compared to everyone in Major League Baseball. They were spending like a big market team. But the second they got $1 billion TV deal, they're signing people to $900 million contracts.
Yeah.
And that's the difference, and that's the reason why it's so different in MLS compared to NBA, Major League Baseball, all of these things.
And if we go to more soccer leagues in general, um, you'll see the last 5 years the Premier League teams have been able to be the biggest player in transfer markets every single window, and that's simply because the TV money that's coming into the Premier League. There's a reason that even teams like Real Madrid and Barcelona sometimes struggle to compete financially with the Man Uniteds and of the world, and that's not because Real Madrid or Barcelona are less popular or have less fans coming into their games. That's simply because the money the Premier League has in terms of TV deals. So TV deal is very, very important to sports currently. I do say want to say there's a piece on Backheel on how much it costs to run a USL team. It's not an MLS team, obviously, but it kind of talks about the different USL levels. So I would highly recommend going to take a look at that from backheel.com, who also Ben writes for them sometimes. So it's a nice little Nashville tie in there. But overall, I think this media deal for with Apple, there's just a lot that is happening outside of the money that the league got that maybe wasn't as great as promised, and I think that's kind of adding to this growing notion of like what actually is going on here. Was this as good as as we thought it is? To be fair, this is probably deserves its own 7 episode series, so I'm not gonna go into it. But I just wanted to say, good question, Thomas. Good question.
Yeah, and so with that said, let's go to the greatest television product in American soccer, the U.S. Open Cup. Uh, so, which at least is broadcast on television now. So, hey, I mean, I'm being a little facetious, but there is some truth to the matter there. Uh, Nashville SC has drawn against Chattanooga Red Wolves, obviously the most famous team in Chattanooga, as everyone knows. Uh,
Don't do that, dude. They're gonna be upset. They're gonna find the show. I don't know how, but they're gonna find it.
oh man, it's bad. I was a member of the Chattahooligans at one point in the distant past, but I we talked about how much the Open Cup means to both of us. Some of our most treasured moments, honestly, as Nashville SC fans, came from the Open Cup. I mean, we got to see NSC play down here at a terrible game against Charleston at MTSU. That was fun. Also, a terrible game against FC Tormentor 2 down here. But there's been some really fun moments for lower league teams. But the most important thing for Nashville SC right now is this is their best chance this year to win a trophy. Is the U.S. Open Cup, and that will begin with the Chattanooga Red Wolves at home next month.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to have a Tennessee team come into Geodis Park. I think that's what he has had San Antonio and maybe Dallas come to Geodis Park for the Open Cup recently. You know, when it's really hard to build any sort of local connection when the team is a 12-hour drive away, I guess, because there's no local connection there. To where Chattanooga is a little bit of a different deal. I was really hoping it would be one of the Tennessee teams, and I was really hoping one of them would make it. Now Chattanooga themselves, they've had an interesting route to get here. They've drawn every single Open Cup game, all three of them that they've played, and they've advanced in all three of them in penalties. So really, really interesting. They had a Chattanooga Derby the round before the last, and they were able to get past Chattanooga FC in a game that was attended by almost 13,000 people in Chattanooga. Unprecedented crowds in terms of soccer there. Really cool to see that sort of culture starting to build in America. But look, there's no hiding from it. This is a third division team. Nashville SC is in MLS. There's no world where Nashville SC should lose to this team. If they do, this will be one of the biggest upsets in the history of Tennessee in general, but also in the tournament. And I think they are one of 4 third division teams left in the tournament out of 32. So only 4 of 32 are from Division Three. The rest are between USL Championship and MLS. I think it's the Red Wolves and hold on, I have it. AV Alta and Union Omaha from League One. Those are the three, and then Tacoma Defiance, who are Seattle's second team, will play in MLS Next Pro. Those are the 4 third division teams. Fun fact: the Tacoma Defiance are hosting the Portland Timbers. One of the biggest rivalries in MLS is Seattle's Portland, and having Seattle's second team host Portland is truly, you know what? It's a disgrace. I hate this tournament that they did this to this tournament. Just give me Seattle, Portland. It's so much more fun. Anyway, how do we get here? Chattanooga Red
I,
Wolves, Nashville SC. They're playing against each other. There you
I
go.
mean, just one of the more iconic moments of the Seattle Portland's modern rivalry was an Open Cup game at the old Seattle 2 Stadium because Clint Dempsey got a red card and then grabbed the referee's notebook and tore it up, which permanently banned him essentially from the Open Cup for the rest of his career. That's Clint Dempsey who did that. I mean, that's crazy, right? So the Open Cup matters. Um, but we're looking forward to it. We'll be there, obviously. Very much looking forward to the Open Cup. It's one of my favorites every year. It has been for maybe like 20 years at this point. So let's get to Nashville's actual next match first, which is that Nashville will be home to Chicago this weekend. And Chicago is like a classic, very confusing MLS team in that you have no idea what you're going to get out of them, and that they've beaten Vancouver this year and they've drawn with Inter Miami, and they've also drawn with Montreal. And so, like, who knows? But this is a team that Nashville should have the edge on going into the match.
Yeah, simply having home field advantage, I think it has over and over been proven in MLS, being very important. Look, this is a team in a similar boat than that to Nashville SC. This is a team with a first time head coach. Sorry, first year head coach. That's what I meant to say. It is not his first time head coaching, and that's Greg Berhalter, of course, for Chicago. The difference here is that Greg Berhalter is also a sporting director or chief soccer officer, or whatever you want to call it. So he's calling the shots in terms of all things in Chicago. The other thing is that Chicago has been bad consistently for about 10 years. So he has a lot more to fix, I think. But
Longer.
what longer? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
um, However, it is a team that is finding some life this season in MLS, and I think any team coached by Greg Berhalter in MLS finds a little bit of stability. Even though they haven't had a win in their last three, they are just a point away from Nashville C on the table. This is a very good team. Jonathan Bomba was an addition this winter. This is a guy who's really, really good. Every game I watch of Chicago Fire, Jonathan Bomba is one of the stars there. And then obviously Hugo Kuipers, who's competing for the Golden Boot in MLS right now. He scores even when the team loses. He's always scoring. He's one of those guys that just a pure goal scorer. What I think people think Sam Surridge is. So I think Brian Gutierrez is a young guy they have as well. They signed Jack Elliott, and also people Nashville SC fans will know him from his Philadelphia Union days. Andrew Goodman plays for this team. Nashville SC fans, OG Nashville SC fans will know him from really weird times. This
Second
team,
episode of this podcast, I think.
yeah, there's a whole episode
You
dedicated
can
to
find
Andrew
out just how
Goodman.
much I hated the former general manager of the Chicago Fire on that one.
So I think if you look through the Chicago Fire, sort of quality wise, it's there. It's just a matter of putting things together, and I don't think this is going to be an easy game for Nashville SC at all.
I think a lot of people that maybe fall in love with U.S. men's national team Twitter, which, I mean, good luck to you if you have, don't understand how good of a coach Greg Berhalter was in MLS with the Columbus Crew. They'll throw in that he had, his seasons were kind of pedestrian, but they were kind of pedestrian seasons in a situation that no one could win it. And he had some um, pretty notable wins in building that Columbus Crew team that ultimately, became a team that won MLS Cup just what was it, like 2 years later, a year and a half later, something like that. And so I think that the circumstances that he was in Columbus kind of papered over how good a job that he did in Columbus with a owner that basically didn't want the team to survive. And in Chicago, you're kind of seeing not the same type of situation, but building from nothing. Like we've been to games in Chicago. There's so much work to do up there. And he walked in and he's done a pretty good job. He is fairly early on in the build process, certainly earlier on than BJ is here. And I don't know that you could bet against him getting something figured out in Chicago on the basis of what he's done already. And I think that they're probably going to have a big signing in the summer as well to add to what they already have. So this might be the right time to go ahead and get your
It
match against Chicago.
it could be a certain Kevin De Bruyne going there. It was
Yeah, yeah,
reported by Paul Tenorio earlier last week
yeah.
that Chicago is one of the 4 teams in MLS looking for Kevin De Bruyne. So
Right,
yeah.
and it wouldn't be out of character. They've had, they've had fairly big names play for Chicago for some fairly terrible teams.
And if you
So
don't know who Kevin De Bruyne is, Google him.
yeah, yeah. So I I think that this is a game that Nashville should win. Nashville is better than Chicago. Nashville's playing at home. Nashville should beat this Chicago team, but they are no slouch, and they are probably better than you think they are on the basis of how they were the last several years.
You
So
should go into it. Just go into it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and give my prediction here. So first off, you can check me out at Clay La Soul on Instagram and Twitter. You can check out the Nashville Soccer Archive. And before I give you the score, I got to tell you this weird story. There's a biographer of a certain well-known 1980s band that was reaching out to me to ask about a former Nashville Metro player uh, with the last name of Njaye, sort of like Iliman Njaye, but a different guy who played for Nashville in 1990, and he's basically a ghost. I went through every page of the Nashville banner in 1990, trying to find existence of this man, and through the Tennessean. And there's one story that says he used to play for the Metros. So some guy in Norway is trying to find this out. This might be our first Nashville Norwegian connection, of which there have been several in the Metros and NSC over the years. So if you know anything about him, please reach out to me at Clay La Soul, and I will pass it on to this Norwegian journalist who's been asking me about him. And then after you do that, you can settle in on Saturday night at Geodis Park and watch Nashville get a 3-0 win over the Chicago Fire. It'll be like the Montreal game. They're going to come out guns blazing, and I think they're going to have a pretty good night.
One thing I forgot to mention is that Greg Berhalter used to be B.J Callaghan's boss and in the national team, and B.J Callaghan was his longtime assistant with the U.S. national team, and at one point took over on interim basis. Then went back to being assistant again to Greg Berhalter because the U.S. men's national team does stuff like that sometimes. Um, that said, I think it's going to be interesting to see these two guys go at it. They both play a fairly similar style, I think. Not the same, but similar. And I think it's going to be a shootout. I think it's going to be one of those back and forth games. And I am going to I'm going to predict a 3-2 Nashville SC win with goals from Hani Mukhtar, Sam Surridge, and Gaston Brugman. Let's do it. I don't know. I was trying to find a weird one for the third. So yeah, that's my prediction. You can follow me at Valer Shabila on Twitter and Blue Sky and Instagram. That's mainly where you can find me. And always sign up to 615 Soccer and find us on Discord because we're always chatting about literally anything. Sometimes things that aren't even soccer related because it's fun to chat with friends who have similar mindsets. How about that?
And Steven, who is PH Steven HD on Twitter, has told us that he thinks Nashville is going to lose 4-1, and the one goal will actually be a Chicago own goal because he doesn't believe in Nashville because he's a big Chattanooga fan now. So
That's true.
make sure you let him know how pissed off you are about his prediction. And we will come back to talk about that Nashville win against Chicago. I'm calling her win right now. I shouldn't do that. That's bad. That Nashville result against Chicago next week right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer. Thanks for listening, y'all.